Good evening. Ram 55 is with you again. I'm back after quite a bit of a layoff. I've had quite a few things going on in my life, including a relocation from Grand Rapids to the Midland Bay City area of Michigan. And in addition, there's been a lot of personal things going on in my life that I'm still dealing with, and as a result, I have not been able to do much gaming. Well, I'm starting to get a little bit more settled. I'm getting things set up in my house finally. And I want to come back with the video just to keep you guys interested, and I know it's been a little time since I've been able to produce a video. So tonight what I want to do is show you what I've been working on lately, and it's back in the game of Trainz, T-R-A-I-N-Z. I have been working on a mammoth layout, which basically represents at half scale the route from Toledo, Ohio to the Detroit, Michigan area. And it's about, like I said, half scale and putting in all the tracks as they are actually laid out with all the curves, turns, industries, and whatnot. But that's a pretty large project, and it kind of got bogged down for a lot of reasons during the move, and that's something I definitely want to go back and get finished. But in the meantime, I wanted to get something that I can at least play the game with, and then as I'm playing it, I can try some different techniques of some of the tools that they have in the game to see how those work. And anyways, we'll see how it works. This is the layout in front of you. It's 29 boards. Now, for those of you who are astute at counting, you'll notice that there's actually 32 boards. Well, these 3 boards right here are actually not part of the layout. I created those boards and through a bunch of scenery details, buildings, people, stuff like that, that I may want to incorporate in the layout, and it's much easier for me to go to that spot and find them than it is for me to go to this area over here and then look for them by name, especially since I've got such a bad memory and I can't remember the name anyway. So I put them up there. Once this layout is completely scenic and painted and trees and all the buildings and people put in, I will get rid of those 3 boards. So as I noted, I live in Michigan, and this layout is kind of loosely based on a Michigan type scenario. The concept is a mid-1800s to late 1800s turn of the century railroad, so it's going to be steam. It's going to be early steam from the Civil War up to probably about 1880 for the most part, but it can go up into around the 1900s, turn of the century, the Victorian period of American history. To the north, it'll be more rolling hills, and it'll be representing a lumber type industry, but those will not be represented on my layout. Those will be off layout. And then down to the south, there'll be this area here represents a connecting railroad or a crossing railroad that will have a connection with our branch line. Basically, our branch line goes up to the north, up to the logging area, and then over here it goes off to the northwest to another area. But this part down here will be the connecting railroad. So up to the north, off the layout, logging industry. They'll bring the logs down to the south here, and right in this area here will be the first and largest town on the layout. That's called Waterton. The name of this railroad will be the Waterton and Arbor Railroad, and I'll get into reasons for that a little bit later. So the first city will be right in here. The major yard on the layout will be right in this area here. Industries along the waterfront here, utilizing the water for transportation purposes as well as source of income. And then it'll follow this river along the low grade that's associated with rivers up into this area right here, which goes from being hilly and rolling hills of upper Michigan to rather flat area that'll be mostly farming and agricultural down in this area. And then past that we go through the woods and then down into this southern area, which is going to be the second largest city down here. That'll be Arbor, and there'll be a fairly large yard there with several more industries. But let's look at this a little bit more in detail. As we zoom in, you can start to see the blue lines there. Those are where the tracks are. Now where these thick lines are, there's multiple staging tracks there that I'm using just temporarily, but eventually there will be portals. And for those of you who are familiar with trains, portals actually take your train off the layout, and then you can actually schedule them to come back at certain times with random consists and whatnot. But anyways, this one is representing all points north, basically heading off into the logging area. This point is representing all points northwest, going off in that direction. They join up with our line here, and then right in here is where the city is. That major yard still under construction. And again, I got to emphasize that this layout is definitely still under construction. You can see some of the industries right here. The large lake, which actually is represented, perhaps it could be a Great Lake or something like that. Again, this is a fictitious route, but a Great Lake, and the town is nestled right here, and some of the industry kind of wraps around the edge of that lake, and it kind of snakes itself around through the hilly terrain, following the river down to the south, and then in this area here you can see some more industries, and that's the area servicing the agricultural community. Heads south, and then it has to bend more toward the east as it goes around another fairly large lake through a forested area. Once it gets through there, then it heads directly south, where we have this area that's more or less finished. I've got the yard finished. You can see how it interconnects with a couple railroads, this representing all points east, this representing all points west. Some of the traffic will actually go through without coming up and dropping off or picking up any cars from our railroad. And some will come up through this Y, stop at this yard here. And again, the connecting railroads will not have rights or privileges on our line up here, so they'll just drop off cars, pick up cars, and then go back on their merry way one direction or the other. And let's just kind of zoom in on this area. So again, the concept is turn of the century railroad, 1800s to about 1880, steam engines, pretty primitive cars, wooden cars, and the industries will reflect that as well. So here to the south, we're going to zoom in and we'll take a tour of the layout. Again, you can see here the Y, so trains coming from all points east will come up this way that are connecting with our railroad, go up to the railroad yard up here. If they're not doing anything with us, they'll just kind of zip right through, and the same thing with all points west. They'll come in from this direction, go up and drop off some cars for our route, pick up some cars, and then head back on their way. Now, the first industry that we're going to concentrate on is this one here. This one is the lumber industry. Again, they're logging up to the far north. They're putting those logs onto railroad cars and then bringing them to this, one of the major industries on the route. So they'll bring the cars and spot them on these tracks here, where they'll be taken off by these overhead cranes, steam powered, put in right here into stacks, and then eventually put onto this conveyor belt. Well, they'll go into the sawmill where they'll cut those logs up into boards. And then the boards will come out on the other side of the track, or other side of that building, and they're stacked up over here as boards. And then those boards will be put on railroad cars and distributed around the layout, as well as taken off the layout and service the general world. And that's kind of sort of the way that Michigan was too back in the 1800s. We had virgin white pine forests up to the north that were basically decimated during the period by the lumber barons. Those trees were brought down to sawmills, cut up into boards, and those boards were used to basically build the Midwest. A lot of the industry, a lot of the houses and whatnot from that period were built on boards that were milled right here and harvested from Michigan. Now over here is the second largest town. This is Arbor, served by this railway station right there. Right here, this little building, which probably is going to have a little bit more added to it, is a foundry. It just basically makes some local metal work. So that's something that probably needs a little bit more. Up to the north here just a little bit, there's a couple buildings. This first one right here is a general goods shed so that the good people of Arbor can buy their goods. They're going to be brought in by train, either by gondola, by flat car, by box car. They'll be dropped off into that building. And if we zoom in, you can actually see inside that there's crates, and there's actually a box car in there. Box car now. This building right here is going to represent a bakery. So we're going to be dropping off the raw materials, the flour, whatever it takes to bake whatever they're baking. They're going to cook stuff up in their ovens. Some of it's going to be served in the local community. Others are going to be packaged and put into boxcars and transported around the layout as well as around the world. And this building over here on the other side is basically representing a fertilizer plant. Again, it's going to bring raw products in, and they're going to convert it to fertilizer, and that fertilizer will be utilized by the agricultural facilities on my layout, as well as brought to other places around my imaginary world. This is the yard at Arbor. Relatively small by today's standards. Let's get an overhead view of it. You can see it's relatively simple. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 levels of track that are double-ended. In other words, you can get to it from the south, you can get to it from the north. This is the main line down here. This first track will receive all trains coming from off the layout from the south. So if they're coming in from the south, they drop their train off here. They will be broken down. The cars that are being picked up by our railroad will be cut out and sorted in these tracks up here. They will then pick up some of the cars that we've been waiting for their trains to come in, plug back in. Their engine will then be turned around on this turntable, so it'll be headed in the right direction. It will then get reconnected to the train, and then he'll head off back off the layout to the south. The second track, which is this one right here, actually has a train on it right now. That's for inbound trains coming from the north. So these are going to be my trains, the trains from the layout that I'm building. They're going to come in from the south. They're going to drop off their cars here. They're going to be picked up by switching engines. They're going to be sorted on these tracks up here to their final destination, whether they're local, whether they go east, whether they go west. So that will be for inbound from the north. And then the third track is where trains will be assembled. So when the trains from the east and west bring their cars in, they're sorted over here, and there's things that are going north, that train will be assembled right here. And then the locomotives will be attached, cabooses will be attached, and they'll be off their way, and they're going to be heading to the north. This little section of track right here is a caboose track, and the cabooses are a little bit different back in the day than they are from the cabooses I remember. And this final track that has double end going from around here is a runaround track. So basically, if you need to get to the other end of the train, you can't actually go out on the main line. You don't want to disturb that. So this track will be remaining clear of cars. So engines that need to get from one end of the train to cut out some cars or add some cars can do that without having to worry about all the cars that are jamming the center of the track or going out on the main line and interfering with trains that are passing through. Now off to the south here, this track right here is going to be not only a lead track, in other words, when they're breaking cars apart from trains that have arrived, they can use this without fouling the main line. They can pull their cars back out here and then push them back up that way. But it's also a lead track for serving the industries out this way, particularly the fertilizer plant and the lumber plant, which is out there. And then this track right here is a crossover from that lead to get out onto the main and then to service the industries that are over here, which include the bakery as well as the general goods delivery depot and the foundry way off to the south there. And then this track right here is a lead for the switching engines to pull the cars out for sorting out on these tracks up here again without fouling the main line. Now up here again you can see these are the sorting tracks. Probably going to be, depending on how much use they get, probably east-west here, or maybe east-west, northbound local spare cars and stuff like that. That would be the use of those tracks right there. And then this building right here is a car repair facility. So when something gets damaged along the way, needs a little bit of maintenance, we bring the cars in here to get work done. Now right here is probably one of the more interesting sections of any railroad, and that's the turntable. So the trains will come in for servicing, which they will do right here actually. You can see the water tower and this shed that has wood stacked up in it. Basically, these are not oil burning engines, they are wood burning, so they'll come over here, fill up their tenders with some wood, fill up their the boilers with water. They've got some sheds over here for various functions that would be used for the yard gangs and stuff like that. Then they would come over here if they needed to have service. They get on the turntable, which will actually go around and spot them either in the shed over here or the shed over here. They got the roundhouse here, and then some open air stalls as well, or spurs to store engines on. Now there's not going to be a whole lot of engines on my railroad. It's going to be a fairly small railroad. It only has 2 sheds in the roundhouse and the other shed over here. So they can do maintenance on the locos when they come in, empty the ash, do any repairs they need to do. You can see an outhouse in the background there. So that is the town of Arbor and the industries serving that town. You can see it's just a little bit of a city here. There's still a lot more to be done. And again, this is a work in progress. But now let's kind of take a tour north, and let me make sure I got my cursor speed correct. Yeah, it's a little bit too fast, so let's slow that down to about 30. So as we go north, you can see that there's a major lake off to the left-hand side with the forest, and we're going to be cutting right through that forest. Now from a bird's eye view, you can see that the lake is over here, and then there's a river that feeds into it, and it kind of meanders off this way. So our railroad is basically going to cross over that a couple times. The first bridge as we cross over that river and plunge into the forest. The second bridge. And then once we get around the forest and around the river, we head up into the flatlands, and this is representing the farmland. And you can see there's a farm over here with some horses on it and buggies and some other things. Some old barns. He's got some hay and whatnot stored in his barn there. So this is a relatively affluent. Oh, looks like Ma Kettle's out here doing her laundry. Fairly affluent ranch. Here's a slightly smaller ranch. Again, a lot of work to be done with that. They got their outhouses out there, their barn. Another small farm here. This is a rather large, affluent farm again over here. So, again, work to be done with scenery and whatnot. This is the industries of this town, which I'm not really sure what I'm going to call it yet. Probably Middleton or something along that line. Since this is an agricultural area, you can tell it's relatively flat. These are going to be the areas where they bring their produce. So over here, grains such as corn and wheat, they're going to be bagged up, put on the wagons, horse-drawn wagons, and brought over to these facilities where they're stored and then eventually loaded up for local use or to put on boxcars and shipped around the country and are off other parts of the layout. So the grains are over here, fruit and vegetables will be stored over here, and a little bit further north we've got another general goods depot, which will be this building right here. So they're going to take gondolas and flat cars and whatnot, unload them here for the good people of Middleton. And then right here we've got a small lumber yard. Again, these are growing communities. In the 1800s, you can see a building under construction here. Well, this is where they're going to get their lumber to work on that kind of structure from. You can see from the architecture that these are Old West type buildings. Again, we're talking Civil War and slightly later. This is a relatively small, not as affluent town as we saw down in Arbor, or as we will see up in Waterton up to the north. Again, work in progress, a lot of scenery yet to be done on these things. Okay, And let's continue our journey. Oh, this is the passenger station over here. And you can see that it is populated by people from the Old West. They got cowboy hats on. The women have long dresses. That's the way they dressed back in those days. So those are the kinds of folks that are populating the station here. Now, as we drive north, I flattened all this scenery, and I'll be adding some more hills, but this is about where the hills will start to pick up. So we're crossing the river again, and let's get a bird's eye view of what's going on here. Crossing the river as it snakes around. There's a bridge going that way and a little island out there in the middle, and then we cross the river again right here. And then we just continue on north. You can see there's a bit of a rise in the track here. You can see how I flattened the ground out because I was working on it. That will have some hills put back into it. And once again, we cross the river and different kind of bridge each time. You can see this one's kind of like a trestle bridge. And again, there would be hills up here, but I flattened it out just for my own purposes of working on it. You can see how the hills are being formed over there in the distance. Following the river as we snake our way north through the high ground as well as the river. And then we come through this little cut where they found it was not possible to go over the river. It was less expensive just to flatten the ground out, make a cut through those hills, and continue on north toward the town of Waterton. And you can tell there's a pretty big lake here, and again it's representing perhaps one of the Great Lakes. The ships out here are of older vintage. I mean, we're not talking modern freighters and stuff like that. We're talking, in this case, a paddle wheeler, pretty old boat. Over here we've got a sailboat, some more paddle wheelers back here, and just some old ships from, you know, what you might see during that period. Now, the industry served is going to be more industrial in this part. Again, they're taking advantage of their access to the water here. This building right here is representing a manufacturer of gas engines. Remember, at this time, we're starting to get a little bit into the Industrial Revolution, so we've got more factories steam-powered, and the gas horse, or the early cars, basically were coming into existence at the end of the 18th century before they were being mass-produced by Ford and Chevrolet and Oldsmobile and some of the other manufacturers. So this factory here is making gas engines, so it's a pretty good-sized factory. Right here we have an industry that is representing a fishing community. Again, these are the only boats I could find in the size. They're probably totally inappropriate for the period, but you know, they're the fishing fleet. You can see their fishing nets are out to dry right here. So this is the fishing fleet, and this is where the fish are processed, where they, when they bring them back from their catch, put them up here, process them, package them, put them into railroad cars, as you can see right here, and they take their products and push them all around the country. Now you can see why I've named my railroad the Waterton and Arbor Railroad, because these cars right here are already painted with W&A RR, and rather than repaint them and come up with my own cars, I'm just going to use what's already out there, but just adapt my railroad's name to so I can utilize those cars and still have the initials be accurate. This building right here probably will have a little bit more added onto it. Represents a place where they buy nautical supplies, stuff for making their nets, some boating gear, rope, line, sails, and stuff like that. These series of buildings right here are representing a fairly large and affluent shipping company. So goods from around the country are brought over here. They're brought in flat cars, gondolas, and box cars, unloaded into these warehouses, and eventually loaded up onto the fleet of steamships and taken via this huge lake, and let's say it's representing one of the Great Lakes, to other areas around the region. this building right here is representing a box and crate factory. So again, they're bringing the raw goods in, paper products and wood, making crates and boxes. This building represents a stove manufacturer. So they are bringing raw metal in, pounding it into stoves and packaging them up and putting them out on boxcars for shipment across the land. This rather large facility here is a cluster of buildings representing a shipyard. And you can see some of the ships they're building in the background that have already been constructed, waiting for their owners to come pick up. So they're concentrating on primarily sailing ships, but they'll take custom orders for transportation ships, fishing ships, whatever you want. And some of them are going to be the modern steam engine driven ships like that one right there, and some of them are just going to be flat out sailboats. And this one you can see has sails and steam, so they have a propeller on that boat as well. As we proceed further north, we get to the passenger depot for Waterton. Waterton's a larger community, even though it's still being worked on. You can see these large Victorian homes, affluent people. Maybe lumber barons are living there. Maybe the folks who own these businesses down here, the shipping companies, the shipyards and stuff like that, probably living in these relatively large buildings. Again, that's a work in progress. And this is the passenger station servicing the good people of Waterton. This large green building here is, it says Stagnoro Canning Company, but I'm just going to imagine that this is a furniture company. In reality, Grand Rapids, Michigan, and the western side of Michigan is well known for their furniture building. And with the lumber that's being produced on this layout, it just seems naturally fitting that they're going to bring the lumber in, build some furniture, box it up in some boxcars, and ship it on its way. This building right here is a lumber company serving the good people of Waterton, and this one is a fairly large goods depot for the local arrival of stuff that the people of Waterton would want to use. So again, there's going to be a lot more added to this city. And right here is a very crude representation of the yard that will eventually be going in Waterton. Now right here you'll see the various types of passenger cars that they had back in the day. The darker yellow cars at the front are basically the kind of cars you would see during the Civil War. Relatively simple cars. And then the ones you see back here are probably the ones from later in the 1800s. They've got this area in the middle, I assume, for extra headroom as you walk down the center aisle. Those are a little bit later. So two different kinds of passenger railroad cars will be used on our railroad. Again, similar design features on the yard. I haven't designed this one, but it'll probably be a little bit bigger than the one that we had down in Arbor. Here's a pretty good representation of the steam power that we're going to have on our railroad, the W&A RR. Again, I adapted my initials to utilize those and that name. It's a classic American design. It's called a 440, 4 wheels up on the guide wheels, 4 drive wheels, and nothing on the trailing wheels. So it's called a 440 with the tender. And you can see it's a wood burner. It's got a bunch of wood stuck in their tender, and then the water would go into the tender as well. Again, our commutes will be relatively short, so we can probably do a full one-way trip on 1 tank of water and 1 tank of fuel. And when we get to where we're going, we'll get the engine serviced, clean out the ash box, fill up our tenders with water and fuel, and we don't have to stop midway because they're relatively short distances. So my goal for this layout was short distances, get from one point to another, simulate a real railroad, moving products around, both on and off the layout, but I wanted relatively short trains. I want them to be about maybe 10 to 15 cars long. and traveling short distances so I can get from one end of the layout to the other relatively quickly. And then heading up to the north, we go around this bend here. Again, not very detailed yet. We'll have a lot of forest and some other things up here. And this is the branch where we make a decision. Do we go north to the points up north where the lumber industry is, cutting down trees and the community servicing the lumbermen? Or do we go to the northwest and all the facilities and all the cities that are developed out there? Now you can see over here we have deciduous trees. Over here we have pine trees. I think the further north we're going to have more pine than deciduous, and to the south maybe more deciduous than pine. Again, this is all going to be rolling hills, and that's all to be added later. So as we go north, eventually I think I'm going to have this thing curve over to the right-hand corner over in that direction. These will eventually be portals. Right now they're just staging yards for trains as they come onto the layout. Now this is showing you a difference in the railroad cars. These are relatively short cars. I think these are 36 foot, which are pretty short, but those are turn-of-the-century cars with all the billboards on the side. These, the gray one and the red one, are more typical for the Civil War era. You can tell that the wheels and the frames for the wheels are a little bit different. They're sprung differently. They both have the brakes on the top of the car, but these are a little bit bigger, and they're just a little bit more modern here than they are here. So early Civil War era right here, later turn of the century era right there. And then the bread and butter for the north will be these flat cars that will be servicing the logging industry, as these are all loaded up with logs right now. And then over here, this is the typical caboose. Again, it's not the caboose we think of in modern days, but it looks like an old boxcar essentially with some windows in it. They probably put in, it says conductor car right there. They would put their conductor in there. He'd conduct his business. He'd probably have a safe in there. He'd be carrying mail as well, because a lot of the revenue generated by the railroads back in the day was from the U.S. government for hauling mail. And then one of the big differences between them and modern cars was this braking system. Now you can see this wheel. Let's look at it on this yellow car here. You can see this wheel on the top. That's how they applied the brakes. So they had a guy that would walk along these platforms and come back here, step out onto this platform, and while he's standing there, he would turn this wheel that would then apply the brakes to the individual cars. Modern days, it's all done by pneumatics. They have hoses that are hooked up that connect one car to the next all the way up to the engine, and then they apply the brakes to every car simultaneously through those pneumatic hoses. Well, back in the day, they had to be done manually. The guy would stand on these platforms, apply the brakes on this car. He'd run along this platform here, jump across to the other side, apply the brakes on the next car up the line, and so on. Pretty hazardous duty, you would think, right? So that car's rocking and rolling back and forth. They're going, 25, 30, 40 miles an hour, uneven ground and stuff, but they had to manually apply the brakes to each individual car. So that's something that's pretty unique to that era. A lot safer nowadays, obviously. Now, as we head over here, we'll see, again, another staging yard. Again, this will eventually just be a portal that will transport these trains that are being developed on and off the layout magically to all points off the layout. So this is a relatively small train. Kind of shows you the type of cars we're going to be using: wooden gondolas, wooden box cars. We saw the flat cars and whatnot. So small trains, short engines, steam era. So that is basically my layout. The concept is, again, a water route representing perhaps the Great Lakes of area of Michigan. 29 boards in total. And as I make more developments, I'll keep you updated and posted on some of the things that are being done. I hope you enjoyed that, found it was informative. Give me a thumbs up if you like it. Subscribe to my channel if you would like. And please give me some feedback. I like constructive feedback, things that you think I'm doing well, things I could do better. I'm trying to make better videos. So give me your comments and feedback. I appreciate it. And that's it for this edition. And we'll talk to you soon.